Could you imagine having an entity living in the woods behind your home that was either a creature in physical form or a spirit, an energy, which was malevolent and so vile, hateful, and angry that simply the mention of its name would cause it to join you, enter your presence, and eat you? There is one entity, it's called Wendigo, that fits that description. There's a reason I said its name here instead of up there, because they may be real, according to mountains of research I've done, and they may be among us. Though I'll say its name here, Wendigo, we're going to be risky, we're going to be daring, because that's the only way any true cryptozoologist conducts him or herself. As I tell you the story of these Wendigos, the story will be told in their realm, not mine. Join me if you dare. Get my 6. Namesake out of the way, it's time to talk about some historical facts in regards to these entities, these creatures, these spirits. The jury's still out on what they definitely may or may not be. Though I don't intend to speak their name again at this location, I have made sure to position myself right in the center of a very peculiar property, my property, where some very peculiar things have happened over the years. You can see everything behind me. I'm positioned where I can see everything in front of me. So, you know what we're here to talk about. And it's not, potentially, Bigfoot Sasquatch. Though him, her, it, or they may make an appearance. You never know. Though this whole time, it may be that him, her, it, or they that we were referring to was something else entirely. Now, I have traveled the world and I have studied paranormal phenomena, cryptozoological phenomena around the world, in Europe, North America, Asia, okay, multiple countries on all of those continents. And there is one major commonality, one major similarity that many, what we would refer to here in the U.S. as urban legends, have with each other. And that is superstition. And so, as a cryptozoologist and as a student of the paranormal, I have come to build, if you will, for the lack of a better way to explain it, a particular set of skills, or a toolbox, a box of tools I'll go to when questions arise in regard to strange things. And superstition is my hammer. That's one of the tools I always go to almost firstly. Superstition is based on one primary thing, that primary thing being misunderstanding. Many superstitions were formed and were founded in the early days before there was much known about science, when science was in its infancy, when human beings could not explain certain events through logic, and they didn't have the science available to explain certain events, they would come up with superstition. Now, with that said, and this is where I've been drawn to a loss here in regard to my studies and my research with this entity we're discussing today. Again, an entity whose name we said safely a quarter of a mile away, but whose name will not be spoken here due to the fact that if these things are real and they do exist, which I believe they do and I believe they're among us, we're in its realm right now. So, it didn't fit the mold here. Here's what I'm getting at. Superstitions, aside from being founded in misunderstanding or a lack of understanding, have been used to mankind's advantage for two purposes. And I wrote this down. I've been losing sleep doing this research. and I'm intentionally trying to stay low so you can get the horizon. I intentionally waited for that sun to go down behind the hills behind me so that if anyone or anything makes a presence or makes an appearance back here, we'll be able to see that, okay? So keep watching. But here are the two main purposes superstitions have always served throughout history. And I'm going to talk about a couple of things that might not be pleasant, but they are, okay? Okay, number one, superstitions have always served to deter undesirable behavior. One of the most common is, you remember when you're a small child and you're pouting and you're making those ugly faces. Maybe somebody said to you, hey, you better not make that face. Your face will stick like that. That's an old superstition rooted in well, of course, the purpose of which was to deter that undesirable behavior. It's to get the child to stop pouting. If the child thinks, oh no, if I'm making this ugly face, not getting what I want, my face is going to stick like that, the behavior ceases, okay? Number two, superstitions have served throughout history to cover up unpleasant facts, okay? Now, I'm going to use an example of a creature I researched for years on the island of Mindanao. Mindanao is the southernmost island of the Philippine Islands, and there are many minor islands off the coast of Mindanao where my research drew me. That research, of course, predominantly inspired my novel, Isle of Capri. And in that novel, if you read that, and I know many of you did, and I want to thank you for that, there was a creature called Mullinungle. Now, the Mullinungle is a witch-like creature that during the day appears in the form of either a stray cat, a feral cat, or a stray dog. But at night, it turns into a witch-type woman, and this witch-type woman her body separates in half at the waist. Now, she'll hide before she does this. She'll hide in the jungle somewhere in the forest. Her top half separates from her bottom half. She sprouts wings as this happens, like bat wings, giant bat wings, and she flies around through the night to feed. Now, what does she feed on? Here's the unpleasant part. She feeds on fetuses, the unborn children of pregnant women. She has a very long, razor-sharp tongue. It's like a razor at the end, and she slices these fetuses out of these pregnant women and devours them. Now, this superstition goes way back. There are so many people, especially in the more secluded areas of the Philippines, the islands. Watch this up here, if you will. The islands I visited while doing this research for a number of years, where people believe this so devoutly that often men whose wives or whose girlfriends are pregnant, they will stay outside the door of their homes all night to guard their home against the Mullinungle. Now, where does this superstition originate? The story of the Mullinungle goes back for centuries, but superstitions change. They evolve, they morph, and the part about the witch eating what it does, I'll put it that way, no need to be, unpleasant twice, is rooted in Spanish colonialism. Spain, while the English was settling pretty much the entire northern hemisphere of the world, Spain was out settling the entire southern portion of the world. It's not just by coincidence that most of the northern hemisphere, east and west, speak English, and most of the southern hemisphere, east and west side of the globes, speak Spanish. Those were the two world powers at the time. So with Spanish colonialism and occupation came Catholicism. And as you know, if you're a student of religion, that particular sect of religion does not agree with abortion. So the locals were told, you're not allowed to do this. This is no good. So it was done in secret. And so the story became when a woman who everybody knew had originally been pregnant now was not, and she had a scar across her midsection. The story was that a Mullinungle had come by and fed on that fetus. So that the purpose of that superstition then became to cover up unpleasant facts. And I don't know what that loud banging sound was. Keep watching. I'm here to tell this story, and a lot of times when I tell these stories, There are certain entities that don't want these stories told. So keep listening. It's all for a purpose. So now that brings us to the entity in question. Because just a week ago, I received a very disturbing letter from somebody who believes what is on this property is not Bigfoot Sasquatch, but may be that which we're discussing here this evening. I have reason to believe, as do many others, that there's more than just one something here. So, but at any rate, for the last week since receiving that letter, and I made a video of that, and I'll put that video at the very end of this video, so watch that if you missed it. I've been researching this thing like crazy. Now, here's what I've found. Because, again, as a cryptozoologist who's practiced cryptozoology around the planet, my number one tool to go by was superstition. So to get to the root of the superstition, you've got to look back through history and try to find where these stories started. Now, again, the number one purpose of situation is, or of a superstition, is to deter undesirable behavior. So the legend has it that these creatures, if someone were to commit the act of cannibalism, consume human flesh, they would then become overpowered by the need to do it over and over and over. That makes sense, doesn't it? In this case, you know what? Let's be daring. In this case, the Wendigo would then would possess the soul of the person who committed that act of cannibalism, causing them I detected movement out of the corner of my eye. I looked, and then we heard a very loud bang, followed by a tree knock back here. Ironically, right after I spoke its name. Okay, so the superstition then, the story of, oh, you better not do that, you better not commit cannibalism because then you will become consumed by it and that's all you'll ever do. That would be to deter that behavior. Now, why cannibalism of all things? Well, this legend of Wendigo originates from Canada, the eastern side of Canada, down through the extreme northeastern part of the United States, as well as the part of the United States that used to be part of New France, okay? And it was purchased by Thomas Jefferson in the Louisiana Purchase. So the Great Lakes region, that portion, okay? Unfortunately, centuries ago, cannibalism was a concern in that area because it's very frigid, very cold. Winters last months and months and months, and it will snow. And a lot of folks watching, this video live in that region. They can tell you, once the snow comes, it doesn't leave maybe for 4 or 5 or 6 months, and it piles up. The original snow of the year never melts because temperatures don't get above freezing, so it stays there and it just gets packed, and food becomes scarce, especially back then. Not so much in modern times because we buy our food at grocery stores. But you figure 16, 17, 1800s, getting food and eating and surviving those winters was a concern. And oftentimes people did, unfortunately, resort to cannibalism. So it could be that this superstition was brought about to deter that behavior, right? Okay, problem solved, right? No, it's not, because there are several odd cases, okay? Perhaps one of the most odd was the case of an indigenous person who went by the name of Swift Runner, who used to be a guide for the mounted police there in what is now Canada. And in 1878, the winter of 1878, he and his family went into the woods, and in the spring of 1879, he came out alone. And when asked about his family, he claimed that they had frozen to death and starved to death that winter. The officials, for some reason, weren't buying his story, and they went and they investigated, and they found that he had actually eaten his family that winter. And the biggest problem I had with it, not that that's, that's not big enough of a problem in and of itself, was that there was food available to him. He did not have to do this. He was tried, convicted of murder, and sentenced to death. And in the fall of 1879, he became the first man who was hanged under Alberta's new laws that allowed hanging in capital cases. So that brings about actually where the creature or the spirit called Wendigo got its name. There's a psychological disorder called Wendigo psychosis, which is the psychological condition which causes someone to actually crave the consumption of human flesh. Yeah, I guess that's a thing. I don't have any experience with that, fortunately, but that's where the name comes from. So could it be that Swift Runner simply came down with a case of this condition? So that was what I started seeking out to find facts behind. Secondly, listen, the first written case in Western writing goes back to the 1600s. And the answer, of course, I'm getting ahead of myself here, but the answer to the last question would be no. And here's why. There was a group of Jesuit priests, Jesuit missionaries, a bunch of Jesuit missionaries, Catholic missionaries up in Canada 400 years ago, trying to spread Catholicism, who encountered one winter a clan of what is now called Wendigos. They were human in form. They were men. But these men set upon their camp, set upon the local village where they were trying to convert the indigenous people. And they ate women, they ate children, they attacked and they ate men. The only way these men who the cannibals could be stopped was through execution. They had to kill them. Now, when someone comes down with a mental illness or a psychological condition, that's not transmittable like a physical condition, such as, we're living in the days of coronavirus. Okay, if I catch that and you get too close to me, or I'm out there coughing on you, you can catch that. Okay, but if I'm bipolar, or if I have ADHD or ADD as it's called now, I can't give you that. That's not a communicable disease. That's a mental health issue or a psychological condition. That's not communicable. Okay, nor would Wendigoism be. Okay, Wendigo's psychosis. However, this entire group of men behave this way. And again, they had ample food supplies. They could have attacked the village. They could have stolen their food supplies, but they didn't. They ate them. So that rules that out as well. So my go-to theories, and I've been a cryptozoologist for a very long time, my go-to theories did not shake out with this concept of this thing called the Wendigo. As you can tell, I've changed my position. What I'll tell you is wasn't out of fear. I'm not running away from anything. I'm moving closer towards something. So continue to get my 6 as the sun continues to set behind me. I'm going to tell of another story, in which case there was no mention of a Wendigo, and it's important. I'm going to tell you why, because I've finally come to my conclusion on this thing called the Wendigo. Most Americans over the age of 40 will know of this. Most Americans under 40, and a lot of folks around the rest of the world will have never heard of this, but the Donner Party. This was a tragic story of some pioneers who were settling from Missouri to California back in the 1800s. They decided to take a shortcut off of the Oregon Trail, and they ended up crossing through a portion of the Rockies. They had no clue how, about the elevation, how harsh the winters were there, and they got stuck. They were snowbound for months. 87 people started out on that campaign, and by the time they got through there and were rescued, only 47 remained. Almost half the party perished that winter, and those of us who are familiar with our history know that those folks in that party did resort to cannibalism to make it through. Those who did survive, they consumed some of those who did not survive. Now, I remind you of this story, or tell those of you who've never heard of this story, because at no time was there ever mention of a Wendigo. And that was an area, it was a little bit south of the area where the stories of Wendigo was common. But later throughout history, the question of Wendigo never arose. Now, compare that story to the two I already told you. Yep, keep your eyes on it, or on them. Looks like more than one. Okay, in the previous stories where Wendigo was cited, there was ample food sources. Those folks who resorted to cannibalism did not need to do that. It's as if they were possessed by a malevolent spirit. The folks involved with the Donner Party, they had no food supplies. It was that or perish themselves, okay? One historian noted that what those people did there was neither, something to be glorified or something to be vilified. They did what they had to do, okay? But in the previous cases I mentioned, didn't need to be done. So this brings about what I believe to be the case with Wendigo. It is a malevolent spirit, an energy that possesses those who are, in my opinion, and this is where I'm going to differ from, as far as I have found in my research, any other cryptozoologist before me. I believe the spirit of the Wendigo possesses those who are consumed with greed. Okay? People for whom enough is never enough. And that's why, frankly, I'm not too concerned with speaking its name out here. Wendigo, Wendigo, Wendigo. I know I don't have any sort of unhealthy, we're all human. We all have our character defects. And to a degree, we all suffer from all of these negative things. But when there's food everywhere, such as, and I don't want to judge Swift Runner. I wasn't there. I don't know all of the facts, but to have food readily available and to do what he did was pretty much to say, my life is more important than yours. My sustenance, me. As an empath, and as a cryptozoological empath who believes these entities we study are empaths as well, I'm going to back away from that emotion I was just getting too close to. And put your earbuds in, rewind, and listen if you didn't hear that, and you'll understand why I'm backing off, okay? Now, there was a shaman, and this is up in Canada, an indigenous Canadian by the name of Jack Fiddler, and it's ironic. This is just irony. You guys know who Jack Kevorkian was, right? Maybe not. Jack Kevorkian, I think he's still alive. I meant to Google this before I came up here and made this video, but I forgot. But he believed in euthanasia, the right to die, and in the 1990s, I was in college at the time, he was going around helping people check out. And he was later convicted of murder and sentenced to life in prison. And I believe he's still in prison, if he's still alive. I know the last I heard of him, he had changed his viewpoint, and he was begging for release, but they were like, nah, the deed has been done. But Jack Fiddler, this indigenous Canadian in the late 1800s, early 1900s, he was a shaman, and he specialized in dispatching Wendigos. Now, here's why I'm telling you this story, because we've come to the conclusion, as I see it, that these Wendigos are real. So, how do we defend ourselves from them? I believe an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Check yourself before you rickety wreck yourself. And that's from the 80s, not the 90s. But look into your heart, look into the heart of those you surround yourself with. Are you hanging out with a bunch of greedy bastards who are like consumed with self? Are you that person? Chickadee, check yourself before you wreck yourself. Okay, if there's this malevolent spirit, this malevolent energy that will consume you if your heart is filled with greed, that ain't a good thing, okay? So Jack Fiddler, the shaman, he would be called upon to, kind of like an exorcist, to exorcise Wendigos, but he didn't exorcise them. You know what he did? He helped these people check out, and you know what that means. The Canadian government, this is the turn of the last century, 1900s, I guess, single digits. Science had evolved, okay? Our understanding of the world had evolved. So when acts based upon superstitions like this were continuing to be carried out, governments, Western governments at least, at that point in history, did not like that. And so they went and they arrested Jack Fiddler. He was convicted of murder. and he was sentenced to death. He had helped 14 people who felt they were suffering from Wendigo psychosis check themselves out, so to say, Jack Kevorkian style, before they went out and acted upon this Wendigoism. Jack Fiddler escaped from prison before he was executed, and he did commit suicide. He killed himself. I guess he wanted to be the one to end it. He didn't want, the new government to do it. So there you have it, folks. That's the story of the Wendigo. Now, do you believe? And if so, do you believe that there may or may not be a Wendigo running around the woods behind my home with potentially Bigfoot, Sasquatch, or other things, ghosts of Civil War soldiers, as some people have pointed out they've seen in the videos? Well, before you make too much fun of me, and before you make too much fun of the folks who comment on my videos, I'm going to ask you, what's in the woods behind your house?